In only one single life, the high goals you have in mind cannot be achieved. In only one single life, it is impossible to realize even approximately the gigantic potential that lies within you. Only the eternal path of the soul allows you unlimited growth, infinite development to ever higher levels, far beyond today's humanity. Only in this way can the proud idea become a reality. Man walks on the path to God. The synthesis of all the qualities of an immortal is joy. True joy of being is independent of the external circumstances. It is a property of the soul. It is a mental attitude. Joy of being comes from the heart, as is popularly known. He who does not carry heaven in his own heart will not be able to find it anywhere else. Whence comes this stimulating feeling called joy of being? Why does this joy not depend upon wealth or self-satisfaction? It may arise amidst the most grievous difficulties and persecutions. In times of stress, joy is especially valuable and healing. We call it joy of being, for it does not depend on personal circumstances, success, or benefits. Can there be feelings of joy when one is afflicted with disease, or when one is the victim of injustice or insult? Indeed, for even in such circumstances the eyes may sometimes fill with fire, the bowed head may rise, and new strength may be experienced. Then one begins to rejoice at life. Perhaps not at one's earthly life, but at the real being. Are you downcast because unfavorable circumstances impede the realization of your dreams? This stems from your perishable personality. Anima, your eternal individuality, thinks differently. She knows that she has unlimited time at her disposal to wait patiently and to try again once the time is right. Are you sad because of a loss, or because you are being humiliated, disregarded, or insulted? Even that is not you. This is not the way anima feels. Your spiritual nature is not affected by such offenses. It is true, for your perishable personality there is not much to laugh about. The weather, your health, your salary, your mood, or the world situation often leave much to be desired. Your eternal individuality may always be joyful. As an immortal, You look at all the ugliness and the obstacles of everyday life from a completely different point of view. Namely, as the Romans said, sub specie aeternitatis. From the point of view of eternity, seen with the eyes of the soul, all adversities are occasions, namely possibilities that allow your higher spiritual self to ascend one step further. Without struggle with opposing forces, there can be no growth. The mortal threatens to perish under the beatings of fate. He is a slave of the circumstances which drive him back and forth like a leaf in the wind. The immortal thinks differently. The path of the soul is the ascent to ever greater heights, towards a great soul, Mahatma. Thus, anima, your eternal individuality, actually rejoices at everything which allows her to advance on this path. Every traveler who is enlightened by the thought about the eternal path can proceed in joy. The fate of Job is a classical example of the fact that everyone on the earthly path has to cope with suffering and distress in abundance. The soul, however, can only test, exercise, and strengthen its power by such adversities. It can advance on its endless path only in difficult situations. An easy life does not give it any opportunity to grow greater. Dangers, obstacles, and attacks are trials of your spiritual progress, opportunities to prove, exercise, perfect, and strengthen the power of your spirit. A slave can toil in depression, but the fiery spirit transforms everything by the most luminous joy. The challenge that is just now facing you is nothing else but the next step on the ladder of your ascent to God. Once you have climbed it, you will stand on a higher level, stronger than before. You must understand, this step does not lie ahead of you by accident. Its deep meaning is to enable you to grow. You should consciously use this opportunity. If you want to reach the heights faster, you will ask for great challenges. You will even welcome external difficulties as a further step of your spiritual ascent. Cast the sunlight of the self obliquely on the cares of daily life, and they will swiftly turn to golden opportunities. To always keep in mind our supermundane existence is the only way to transform suffering into joy. This redeems us from the worldly misery. It leads to a true transfiguration of earthly life. Without material resources, solely with the power of his spirit, the immortal turns the thorns on his path to roses. With this attitude, he can live like in heaven, already down here on earth. Joy abides in the triumph of the Spirit. The generation of the future is walking an eternal spiritual path, and therefore in all situations optimistic and full of joy of being. You are complaining, this world is imperfect, because there is so much suffering. This, however, is wrong. Correct is suffering will exist only as long as the world is still imperfect. In a perfect world, suffering is no longer required. There, it does not have any purpose to fulfill. Pain points to weak spots or wrong behavior of the body. When I constantly bump my head against the wall, the body sends the signal to me that I am going to harm it if I continue to do so. You should actually be grateful for this reminder. The same applies to suffering. As pain shows the body, so suffering shows the soul, where it is still weak or where it is behaving wrongly. For this indication, the wanderer on the spiritual path can only be grateful. The hints given by suffering enable him to remedy weaknesses, to eliminate misconduct, and to further develop his eternal individuality. If he succeeds, the suffering will end, because then it has no longer any function. A great, strong soul knows no suffering, just as a healthy body does not hurt. The sign of health of the spirit is joy of being. A great soul is not like a little lamb that frolics on the pasture and knows nothing of the evil, the ugly, or the disgusting. On the contrary, it has passed through all the pain of the world and succeeded to overcome it in spirit. In the midst of the worldly confusion, it takes the superior attitude of a king of the spirit, who sits firmly on the throne of his higher self, walks his path unperturbed by the circumstances, and even grows through resistance. My advice is that you realize the number of cares cannot be lessened. Only thus do we realize that joy is a special wisdom. A king is not a king because he never gets into trouble. On the contrary, he reveals himself as a true ruler and leader by mastering even the greatest misfortune with a smile. Thus, experienced coolies carry their burdens up the mountain with songs. This is Mozart's supermundane joy in the midst of all suffering and pettiness, the joy of a great spirit at every new day, namely at every opportunity to grow. This true inner joy is a sign of the wisdom of a master of life who has risen above all occasions and takes whatever happens to him the standpoint of eternity. This joy of being is possible in all, even the worst conditions. It finishes with the repugnant desperation which the mortals are accustomed to exhibit at every minor calamity. This unworthy lamenting must come to an end. Every smile hides a power. We find confirmed once again, man is what he thinks. He who trains his spirit to the effect that he is able to rejoice whatever happens is actually a more joyful and thus a more beautiful, greater person. The less this exercise succeeds, the more we make of ourselves sad, depressed, hopeless, and small beings. Let us look at a contemporary example for this attitude. Do you know this man? How would you assess him? Apparently a rather coarse fellow, someone whom you would not like to meet in the moonlight. Maybe a gangster boss from Chicago? And now you see the same man and recognize him immediately. Nelson Mandela. Do you know what lies between these photos? Over 25 years of captivity on Robben Island, one of the most horrible places in the world. Most people would have perished in such an ordeal. Mandela, however, knew that it was intended to break him. He devised a counter-strategy for himself and his fellow prisoners, which proved to be stronger than the terrible circumstances. Nelson Mandela recognized and seized an opportunity. He consciously used the most terrible conditions in order to grow spiritually. He entered the prison as a relatively crude fellow and developed there to a great, wise man with always a superior smile on his lips. Thus, from the point of view of a high consciousness, even a quarter of a century in prison may be a blessing, a reason for gratitude and joy. We too should take advantage of the small weight imposed upon us in order to grow. Then we can rejoice at the apparent burden, which in reality is a step of the stairway to heaven. You have learned how you can turn to an immortal in 7 steps and assume a new identity, without gender, without age, standing above nations and religions. We have seen the characteristic qualities of an immortal: inviolability, invincibility, fearlessness, freedom, joy, and selflessness. Now we are approaching the end of this broadcasting. This means, however, that the real work starts. We are asking for the last time, what does it mean to be an immortal, a non-material being, a creature which you can neither see nor touch? To live means to grow. That which has ceased to grow is dead. Flowers and trees fulfill their mission by growing and elevating themselves towards the sun. The same applies to your spirit. Like a child, it strives to grow greater. When it comes to a standstill, it grows stiff and dies. To grow means to develop the skills that are stored within you. With inviolability, freedom, and joy, we have mentioned only the very first steps of the realization of the gigantic potential of an immortal. In fact, as soon as you become a spiritual being, possibilities will open up, which are so fantastic that you will hardly believe them. A non-material being is not bound by the limitations of matter, time, and space. It can walk, like Sartre's ghosts, through walls and closed doors. Like X-rays, it is capable of looking through dense objects and of reading enclosed books. It can perform levitation, which means to rise from the ground, like Saint Joseph of Cupertino and other saints. Walk on the water, like Jesus. Sit on the water, like a yogi. Walk through fire. And even fly. It is immune to diseases. It can practice telekinesis, that is, like Uri Geller, move objects solely with its spiritual power. It is able to send thoughts, like a transmitting station, as well as to receive and to understand thoughts, like a radio. It is capable of understanding foreign languages and of communicating, like Saint Francis of Assisi, with animals. Like Jesus, it can heal with its spiritual power and predict the future like a prophet. Miracles, or better, higher skills of this kind, as they are reliably reported from the life of Jesus and numerous saints, are nothing but the natural consequence of the development of the spiritual powers of your eternal individuality. Within each one of us lie the germs of these abilities. Other men are ahead of us and have developed them already to a larger extent than we. Begin to realize these gigantic possibilities of your higher self. Prove Nietzsche wrong, who said, "We are unable to perceive anything today that aims at growing greater." Let us rather stick to Goethe and raise the peak of the pyramid of our existence as high as possible into the air. As to your muscles, there applies, when you use your spiritual powers, they will grow. When you exercise your physical powers, your body will become bigger and stronger. When you practice your spiritual powers, your eternal individuality will grow great and strong. The mission of your soul, still small today, is to finally become a great soul, a Mahatma.